I am Clara. I am 23 years old. For 23 entire years, I lived my life exactly like an indentured servant inside my own supposed home. I was forced to wake up at exactly 5 o'clock every single morning to aggressively scrub hardwood floors, cook elaborate, multi-course meals, and wash massive piles of laundry, all while my older brother, Julian, peacefully slept until noon in his sprawling, king-size bed. My parents repeatedly told me a specific narrative that I fundamentally, foolishly believed for over 2 decades. Certain children are inherently born to be graciously served by the world. Other children are biologically born exclusively to serve them. You, Clara, are undeniably the second kind. I absolutely never, ever questioned that toxic logic. Not until the father of my brother's bride, a prominent man I had absolutely never laid eyes on before, intensely studied my face during a formal family photograph, began visibly trembling, and pulled me aside to ask a single, explosive question that completely shattered absolutely everything I thought I knew about my existence. Do you possess any idea exactly who your real biological mother actually is? Before I take you through the terrifying, meticulous details of how my entire reality violently unraveled, if this story of survival and uncovering massive, dark secrets resonates with your own spirit, please take a moment to engage with this video. But I ask that you only do so if you genuinely, deeply want to hear exactly how this nightmare concludes. And if you are currently watching this, please drop a comment letting me know exactly where in the world you are located and what time the clock is showing. Now, I desperately need to take you backward in time. Let me take you back to the grueling morning of Julian's opulent wedding. The specific day I falsely assumed would be the absolute worst, most humiliating day of my entire life. We resided in a massive, sprawling, 2-story colonial estate located in Fairfield County, Connecticut. It was the exact type of fiercely exclusive, affluent neighborhood where every single expanse of lawn was meticulously manicured by professionals, and absolutely every family drove imported European luxury vehicles. Our immediate neighbors were elite neurosurgeons, high-powered corporate attorneys, and senior partners at massive hedge funds. From the outside looking in, the Sterling household appeared to be the absolute, flawless manifestation of the American dream. From the inside, however, it was my personal, inescapable nightmare. My assigned bedroom was absolutely not a traditional bedroom. It was the unfinished, freezing concrete basement. It featured zero natural light, absolutely no windows, and a thin, heavily stained mattress resting directly on the floor that constantly smelled of damp mildew. The massive, industrial furnace loudly hummed a mere 3 feet from where I rested my head. During the brutal Connecticut winters, it was the absolute only source of physical warmth I possessed. During the sweltering summers, the cramped space was suffocating and unbearable. Every single morning, my cheap alarm clock would aggressively ring at exactly 5 o'clock. By 5:15, I was strictly required to be upstairs in the massive, pristine kitchen, aggressively scrubbing the expansive granite countertops, preheating the massive, professional-grade Viking stove, and pulling organic eggs and thick-cut bacon from the massive Sub-Zero refrigerator. The sprawling kitchen island was constructed of imported, rare Italian marble. Eleanor once arrogantly bragged about its exorbitant cost to her elite neighborhood book club. I intimately knew every single intricate, gray vein running through that stone, simply because I was forced to meticulously polish it on my hands and knees every single day. Arthur would typically descend the grand staircase around 7 o'clock, his crisp Wall Street Journal firmly tucked under his arm, his heavy, solid gold Rolex aggressively glinting on his wrist under the recessed lighting. He would comfortably settle into his plush, custom leather armchair situated in the sunny breakfast nook, absolutely never once bothering to make eye contact with me. "Is the meal fully prepared?" he would bluntly ask, completely without lifting his eyes from the printed financial headlines. "Yes, Mr. Sterling," I would reply softly. "The dark roast coffee is entirely too weak today. Ensure you make it significantly stronger tomorrow morning." That was the absolute, total extent of our daily verbal interactions. 23 entire years composed exclusively of sharp monosyllables and cold, barked commands. I would carefully set his warm plate down onto the table, exclusively using the expensive, imported fine china with the delicate silver rim, and immediately retreat backward into the kitchen. My physical place was absolutely never, ever permitted to be at that family table. My designated place was standing silently beside the deep stainless steel sink, hastily consuming whatever meager, cold food scraps were left behind only after the entire family had fully finished their meals. But the specific thing that hurt my soul the absolute most was not the freezing concrete basement, nor the endless, bone-crushing physical chores. It was the chilling, clinical way they explicitly referred to me. Julian's sprawling bedroom was located on the second floor. It was a massive, premium corner unit featuring beautiful bay windows that perfectly overlooked the manicured English garden. He possessed a massive, 65-inch flat-screen television permanently mounted on his wall, the latest, most expensive gaming consoles, and a sprawling, custom walk-in closet that was significantly larger than my entire basement living quarters. He attended St. Jude's Preparatory Academy, an elite institution costing over $45,000 a year. He was the star captain of the lacrosse team and heavily prepped for Ivy League college admission. I remained completely trapped at home. She is strictly homeschooled. Arthur would smoothly lie to the affluent neighbors whenever they politely inquired about my absence. The dark, unvarnished truth was significantly simpler and infinitely crueler. Absolutely no one in that house taught me a single academic thing. I aggressively taught myself how to read by secretly scavenging old, discarded magazines that Eleanor carelessly threw into the recycling bin. I painfully taught myself basic mathematics by meticulously counting the loose change when I was rarely permitted to walk to the local grocery store to run their errands. When Julian proudly turned 18 years old, Arthur ceremoniously handed him the keys to a brand new, gleaming white luxury BMW sports sedan. I did not even possess a basic learner's permit. More importantly, I absolutely did not possess a single, valid form of legal identification. Your official, original documents were tragically lost in a massive house fire years ago, Eleanor coldly told me once when I was 12 years old and had dared to ask exactly why I could not simply enroll in the local public middle school. It is entirely too complicated and expensive to legally replace them. You are infinitely better off remaining safely here with us. I foolishly, blindly believed her. Why on earth wouldn't I? I genuinely believed she was my biological mother. Julian possessed an exclusive, high-limit American Express Platinum card directly linked to Arthur's massive corporate account. He faced absolutely zero spending limits. He routinely purchased limited edition sneakers that cost significantly more capital than I had ever physically touched in my entire life. I personally owned exactly 3 basic, faded dresses, all of which were outdated hand-me-downs discarded by Eleanor, clumsily altered by my own hands to fit my significantly smaller, malnourished frame. At dinner time, the family unit would sit closely together. Julian would animatedly discuss his advanced classes, his elite circle of friends, and his lavish weekend social plans. Arthur would nod with intense, patriarchal approval. Eleanor would smile brilliantly and constantly refill his crystal water glass. I stood perfectly still in the kitchen doorway, silently waiting to clear their dirty plates. Once, when I was exactly 14 years old, I gathered the courage to ask Eleanor exactly why I was not permitted to sit and eat with them. She let out a sharp, high-pitched laugh exactly as if I had just delivered a hilarious punchline. Clara, honey, the dining table simply only seats 3 people comfortably. The massive, custom-built mahogany table comfortably seated exactly 8 adults. I had counted the heavy wooden chairs 1,000 times. That specific, agonizing night, I finally realized a profound, devastating truth that I had spent my entire childhood desperately refusing to admit to myself. I was absolutely not a member of this family. I never, ever had been. Arthur ruthlessly enforced what he chillingly referred to as the family rules. He had explicitly written them down on a thick, white index card when I was exactly 5 years old and aggressively taped it to the inside of my basement door. It was the absolute only piece of decoration I was permitted to have in my room. Rule 1. You absolutely do not ever sit at the family dining table. Rule 2. You absolutely do not ever refer to us as mom or dad. You will exclusively address us as Mr. Sterling and Mrs. Sterling. Rule 3. You absolutely do not ever leave the physical perimeter of this house without securing explicit, prior permission. Rule 4. You absolutely do not speak a single word to strangers. The severe, physical consequences for daring to break any of these mandated rules lived permanently inside the kitchen pantry. It was a thin, highly flexible wrought tin cane, the exact kind typically used to repair antique furniture, hidden maliciously behind the tall cereal boxes. Arthur only had to utilize it exactly twice before I profoundly, permanently understood the gravity of my situation. The very first time, I was merely 7 years old. I had accidentally, foolishly referred to Eleanor as Mommy in front of her visiting, wealthy sister. The raised, angry red welts on the palms of my small hands painfully lasted for over 2 weeks. The second time, I was 16 years old. I had secretly, meticulously saved discarded grocery store change for months, hiding exactly $17.32 in a crack in the concrete wall. I bravely walked over 3 miles to the main city bus station. I was terrified, but I was determined to finally leave. I was desperately going to find an adult authority figure who could somehow help me escape. The local municipal police brought me directly back to the house within exactly 2 hours. She absolutely does not possess any form of legal identification on her person, the stern officers told Arthur as they stood on our pristine front porch. No ID whatsoever. Are you absolutely certain she belongs to you? Arthur deployed his absolute best, warm, deeply concerned smile. It was the flawless smile of a loving, terrified father. She is our beloved daughter. She is unfortunately a very deeply troubled girl. She suffers from severe, complex mental health issues. Thank you so incredibly much for keeping her safe and bringing her back home to us, officers. They nodded sympathetically and left the premises. Arthur slowly, deliberately locked the heavy deadbolt. I spent 3 entire days locked inside the pitch-black basement without a single morsel of food. When he finally unbolted the door and allowed me to exit, he leaned incredibly close to my face and whispered venomously into my ear, without legal papers, "You absolutely do not exist in this world. And if you legally do not exist, absolutely no one will ever believe a single word you say. Absolutely no one will ever help you. Do you explicitly understand me?" I understood completely. For 7 entire, agonizing years, I absolutely never attempted to leave the property again. Julian was absolutely not physically cruel in the exact, sadistic manner that Arthur was. He absolutely did not strike me. He did not maliciously lock me in the freezing basement or starve me for days as punishment. He simply, utterly failed to see my existence as a human being. To Julian, I was simply functional furniture. I was entirely forgettable, merely present in the background when he required a service rendered. "Clara, bring me fresh coffee." "Clara, my bedroom is a disaster. Clean it immediately." "Clara, I urgently need my sports car completely detailed and washed before my date tonight." When his wealthy, elite friends came over to the house to socialize, he would casually introduce me with a dismissive wave of his hand. "That is just our live-in housekeeper." Not his sister. Not a family member. The housekeeper. Absolutely no one ever bothered to question the narrative. I looked absolutely, fundamentally nothing like the Sterling family. They all possessed light brown eyes and sandy, wavy hair. My eyes were a deep, piercing green, almost a vivid emerald color when the light hit them correctly, and my hair was a heavy, dark chestnut. I had tentatively asked about the stark physical differences once, years ago. Eleanor violently slapped me across the face and explicitly commanded me to permanently stop asking such utterly stupid questions. At 26 years old, Julian was incredibly handsome, brimming with arrogant confidence, and aggressively employed at one of the absolute largest, most prestigious commercial real estate firms in the entire state of Connecticut. He absolutely had not earned the coveted position through hard work or merit. His extremely wealthy fiance's father had entirely arranged the lucrative job for him. Victoria Whitmore. She was stunningly blonde, impeccably poised, and the sole heir and daughter of Richard Whitmore, the billionaire CEO of Whitmore Properties, an empire valued at nearly $50 million. Julian had romantically proposed to her exactly 3 months ago at Per Se, an outrageously expensive, elite restaurant in Manhattan. He proposed with a massive, flawless 2-carat diamond ring that he had casually charged directly to Arthur's corporate credit card. The Sterlings were absolutely, out of their minds, ecstatic. This impending marriage was absolutely not just about young love. It was a massive, calculated social and financial ladder. I quietly overheard Arthur frantically talking to Eleanor late on the night of the engagement. This is exactly it. This is exactly how we finally secure our permanent place in their elite inner circle. Richard Whitmore possesses the sheer power to change absolutely everything for our family's future. They possessed absolutely no idea that Richard Whitmore would indeed change absolutely everything. Just absolutely not in the manner they so arrogantly expected. The specific woman Julian was preparing to marry would ultimately become the primary, instrumental catalyst in permanently destroying the toxic life the Sterlings had meticulously built. Not because of her own actions, but entirely because of her father. I was exactly 15 years old when I finally, desperately asked the burning question I had been suffocatingly holding inside my chest for years. Eleanor was lounging comfortably in the pristine living room, casually flipping through a thick, expensive home decor catalog, meticulously marking pages with colorful sticky notes. I had literally just finished scrubbing the massive hardwood floors on my hands and knees, and the skin on my hands was bright red and raw from the harsh chemical bleach. "Mrs. Sterling," I whispered hesitantly. She absolutely did not bother to look up from the glossy pages. "What is it now? Why exactly am I so fundamentally different from Julian?" The heavy catalog slowly lowered. Her eyes, cold, entirely flat, and the exact dull color of dirty dishwater, locked directly onto mine. "Different? How exactly do you mean? Why does he get the privilege of attending school? Why is he permitted to sit and eat at the table? Why do I have to?" Because she aggressively cut me off, her voice as sharp and lethal as broken glass. "Certain children are inherently born to be endlessly loved and cherished by the world. Certain other children are biologically born exclusively to serve them. You are undeniably the second kind, Clara. That is your sole purpose in this universe. That is your unalterable fate." She calmly returned her attention to her catalog. The conversation was permanently terminated. I slowly retreated back down to the freezing basement that night and stared intensely at my own reflection in the small, heavily cracked mirror mounted above the rusty utility sink, the absolute only mirror I was permitted to access. My eyes looked absolutely nothing like theirs. My facial bone structure was entirely different. But I actively chose not to question the reality anymore. Eleanor was entirely right, I desperately told myself. Certain people are simply born to be indentured servants. I was undeniably one of them. Actively fighting against that reality would only result in infinitely more physical pain. For 8 entire, grueling years, I completely believed that toxic lie. I woke up at 5 in the morning. I aggressively scrubbed, cooked, and cleaned until my body ached. And I continuously told myself, this is my life. This is exactly what I deserve. And then came Julian's opulent wedding. And the specific, powerful man who looked deeply into my face and saw someone else entirely. I absolutely did not know it yet, but in exactly 24 hours, every single toxic lie I had ever been fed would begin to violently, permanently unravel. The extravagant wedding announcement was officially issued exactly 6 months prior to the ceremony. Julian and Victoria would be married at the sprawling, ultra-luxury Ritz-Carlton estate in White Plains. 200 of the most elite, wealthy guests in the tri-state area. A live, professional classical orchestra. A towering, 5-tier custom cake imported directly from a famous bakery in Manhattan. The total, staggering cost of the event was estimated at over $200,000, incredibly generously covered in its entirety by Richard Whitmore. Arthur practically floated through the hallways of the house for weeks on end. This is undeniably the absolute biggest, most important day of our entire lives, he constantly repeated to anyone who would listen. The Whitmores are established, old money. True Connecticut aristocracy. We absolutely must make a flawless, impeccable impression. Eleanor aggressively threw herself entirely into the exhaustive planning process. She meticulously coordinated with Victoria's wealthy mother regarding the imported floral arrangements, the five-star catering menu, and the elite rehearsal dinner. She purchased a brand-new, stunning designer gown, a champagne-colored Oscar de la Renta original that cost an astronomical $4,000. I naturally, foolishly assumed I would be included as a bridesmaid. I had spent 6 entire, exhausting months actively helping to prepare for the event. I meticulously addressed hundreds of thick, embossed invitations by hand. I organized the chaotic RSVPs. I picked up the expensive dry cleaning. I had even secretly practiced walking gracefully in a pair of discarded heels in the basement, quietly imagining myself wearing a beautiful lavender gown, proudly standing beside the grand altar. Then, exactly 3 weeks prior to the wedding date, Eleanor aggressively sat me down at the kitchen island. "We urgently need to discuss your specific role at the event," she stated. My heart immediately lifted with desperate hope. "Am I going to be walking down the aisle with the bridesmaids?" She let out a sharp, mocking laugh that sounded incredibly cruel. "Absolutely not, Clara. You will be actively assisting with the catering service. You will be passing out champagne flutes, seamlessly ensuring the elite guests have absolutely everything they require." The brutal words hit my system exactly like a bucket of freezing ice water. "You explicitly want me to work as a server at my own brother's wedding?" "It is absolutely not working, it is helping the family," she stated, her smile incredibly thin and heavily practiced. "You intimately know exactly how you are, sweetheart. You are incredibly clumsy. Highly awkward. If you actually stood up there at the altar in front of the entire Whitmore family, they would deeply wonder exactly what is mentally wrong with you. Is that truly what you desire? To violently embarrass Julian on his most special day?" I slowly shook my head, the familiar, freezing numbness rapidly settling deep into my bones. Later that exact same night, the massive stack of wedding invitations finally arrived from the premium printer. Thick, embossed gold lettering pressed onto incredibly expensive, heavy cotton paper. I meticulously searched through every single card in the stack. My name was absolutely not listed anywhere on the family registry. It wasn't printed anywhere at all. The highly exclusive rehearsal dinner was hosted at the elite Greenwich Country Club. Pristine white linen tablecloths, gleaming crystal stemware, and premium champagne that cost significantly more per bottle than I had physically seen in an entire year. The Whitmores had completely reserved the sprawling outdoor terrace, perfectly overlooking the immaculate golf course. I was forced to wear a highly restrictive, plain black, simple dress accompanied by a stark white service apron. Eleanor had aggressively, specifically selected the demeaning outfit herself. "You look perfectly, appropriately professional," she had stated coldly, aggressively adjusting my stiff collar. "Remember the rules. Always smile. Absolutely do not speak a single word unless explicitly spoken to. And remain entirely, completely invisible." I expertly carried a heavy silver tray loaded with delicate champagne flutes, seamlessly weaving my way through the massive crowd. Wealthy Whitmore cousins, elite business associates, and powerful, old-money families whose prominent names I explicitly recognized from the high society magazines Eleanor constantly left scattered around the house. Absolutely no one even bothered to look at me. I was completely, utterly part of the background scenery. Until Victoria finally noticed my presence. She cautiously approached me near the mahogany bar. Her stunning blonde hair was swept up into an incredibly elegant, intricate updo, and her massive diamond engagement ring brilliantly caught the setting sunlight. "You are Julian's younger sister, correct? Clara?" I nearly dropped the heavy silver tray in pure shock. "Yes, ma'am." "Why exactly aren't you sitting down at the main table with your family?" Before I could even attempt to formulate a coherent answer, Eleanor abruptly materialized directly at my elbow, her artificial laugh incredibly high and piercingly bright. "Oh, Clara fiercely prefers to simply help out behind the scenes. She is incredibly shy, always has been since she was a little girl. She is infinitely happier blending into the background." She aggressively patted my arm with the highly exaggerated, fake affection of a woman posing for a magazine cover. Victoria's brow creased with deep, visible confusion, but she politely nodded and slowly drifted back toward her fiancé. I immediately resumed my service rounds. That is the exact moment I finally noticed him. Richard Whitmore, Victoria's billionaire father. He was standing completely alone near the edge of the stone railing, a glass of expensive scotch resting untouched in his hand. And he was intensely, aggressively watching me. He was not casually glancing in my direction. He was meticulously, intensely watching my every single movement. His face had gone completely, shockingly pale. His strong jaw was clenched incredibly tight. He slowly, deliberately approached me. "Excuse me, young lady. What exactly is your name?" "Clara, sir." "Clara?" He repeated the word incredibly slowly, exactly as if he were carefully testing the specific sound of it on his tongue. "Do you happen to know? Do you possess any idea exactly who your true, biological mother actually is?" The bizarre question made absolutely zero logical sense to me. "I am so incredibly sorry, sir." He stared directly into my eyes for a very long, intense moment. Then he abruptly excused himself, rapidly walking toward the secluded parking lot, his smartphone already aggressively pressed tightly to his ear. Eleanor silently watched him depart. Her artificial smile was entirely frozen on her face, and her knuckles had turned stark white as she fiercely gripped her champagne glass. The agonizing night prior to the wedding, I sat completely alone in the freezing darkness of my basement. Upstairs, I could clearly hear the sounds of joyful celebration. Loud, booming laughter. Eleanor happily toasting with her visiting sisters. Julian's rowdy college friends aggressively clinking beer bottles in the massive living room. The entire house was literally vibrating with chaotic, joyous celebration. Down here, there was absolutely nothing but the oppressive, mechanical hum of the furnace and the slow, rhythmic dripping of a leaky overhead pipe. I carefully held the plain black service uniform I would be forced to wear tomorrow, meticulously pressing out the wrinkles with my bare hands, as I was explicitly forbidden from utilizing the iron after 9 o'clock at night. Resting directly beside me was the stark white service apron, heavily starched and absolutely spotless. Resting gently on my lap was a highly faded photograph. It was the absolute, singular physical image I possessed of myself with the family. I was exactly 5 years old in the picture. I was standing awkwardly at the extreme, far edge of the frame, while Arthur, Eleanor, and a toddler-aged Julian posed happily and tightly together in front of the towering Christmas tree. They were all physically touching, projecting unity. I was standing entirely alone. In 23 entire years of existing inside this massive house, I did not possess a single, solitary photograph where I stood proudly beside my parents. Not a single one. Why? The devastating question had silently whispered to me my entire life, but I had always aggressively pushed it down. Asking questions inevitably led to severe pain. Curiosity directly led to brutal punishment. But tonight, sitting in the absolute darkness, the terrifying question simply would not remain buried. Why exactly didn't I look a single thing like them? Why did they consistently treat me exactly like a dangerous, unwanted stranger? Why had they aggressively kept my existence entirely hidden from the world for so incredibly long? I thought deeply about Richard Whitmore's pale, shocked face at the rehearsal dinner. The unmistakable, terrifying tremor in his deep voice when he urgently asked about my mother. He had looked directly at me exactly as if he intrinsically knew me. Exactly as if he had been desperately looking for me. But that was utterly, completely ridiculous. Absolutely no one in the world had ever come looking for me. No one had ever truly wanted my existence. Tomorrow, I would silently serve champagne at my own brother's lavish wedding while my entire family aggressively pretended I did not exist. Then, my miserable life would seamlessly go on exactly as it always had. At least, that is exactly what I falsely believed. I possessed absolutely no idea what massive explosion was rapidly approaching. I woke up at exactly 4 o'clock in the morning on the day of Julian's wedding. The massive house was utterly, completely silent. I quietly crept upstairs and immediately began preparing the complex breakfast. Gourmet eggs Benedict, freshly squeezed, organic orange juice, the exact, lavish spread Arthur explicitly expected before any major, important event. By 6 o'clock, I had the grand dining room flawlessly set with the expensive, imported fine china. Then I quietly moved to the main room, where Victoria's spectacular wedding dress hung safely inside its protective garment bag. A stunning Vera Wang original. $12,000. It featured a heavily, meticulously hand-beaded bodice and a massive, sprawling cathedral-length train. Eleanor had aggressively insisted on storing the priceless gown at our house, falsely claiming our massive walk-in closets possessed significantly better humidity control systems than the sprawling Whitmore estate. The actual, unvarnished reason, I heavily suspected, was simply so she could arrogantly show it off to her envious friends. I carefully steamed the delicate fabric, utterly terrified of leaving a single, microscopic crease. My hands were visibly trembling. If I accidentally damaged this priceless dress, I genuinely did not want to imagine the horrific, violent punishment Arthur would inflict upon me. Heavy footsteps echoed behind me. Eleanor abruptly appeared in the doorway, wrapped tightly in an expensive silk robe, her hair currently set in large rollers. "Absolutely do not touch the delicate beading with your hands," she snapped sharply. "That is imported, rare crystal. It is worth significantly more than your entire life." "Yes, Mrs. Sterling." She stood there and watched me work, her arms tightly crossed over her chest. "When we finally arrive at the luxury hotel venue, you will exclusively enter the building through the rear service entrance. Do not allow a single guest to see you walking into the main lobby." "Yes, Mrs. Sterling." "And do absolutely nothing to embarrass us." Her vocal tone abruptly dropped, becoming razor-sharp and freezing cold. "This is undeniably the absolute most important, monumental day of Julian's entire life. If you do absolutely anything at all to ruin it, I promise you, I will make you violently regret you were ever born." Arthur's booming voice aggressively echoed from downstairs. "Clara, where the hell is my fresh coffee?" Eleanor offered a cruel, satisfied smirk and quickly left the room. I stood there completely alone, tightly holding the hot steamer, staring blankly at the breathtaking wedding dress I was absolutely forbidden to touch, and thinking deeply about the beautiful life I was violently forbidden to live. Something foundational, something fundamental violently shifted deep inside my chest. It was incredibly small, but it was absolutely, irrevocably irreversible. This would undeniably be the absolute last time. I honestly did not know exactly how I would execute it. I did not know exactly when. But I was permanently, utterly done. Enough was enough. The Ritz-Carlton Grand Ballroom looked exactly like something violently ripped from the pages of an opulent fairy tale. Massive, glittering crystal chandeliers dripped aggressively from 30-foot, vaulted ceilings. Thousands of pristine white roses cascaded elegantly from absolutely every conceivable surface. The grand altar, the towering centerpieces, the sweeping, romantic archways. 200 gilded, premium chairs faced a raised platform where Julian would very soon stand and officially promise forever to a woman whose staggering family fortune could easily purchase our entire, affluent neighborhood 10 times over. I quietly entered the building through the dirty, concrete loading dock. The frantic catering manager aggressively handed me a heavy silver tray and pointed sharply toward the main ballroom doors. "Champagne service immediately. Keep constantly moving. Keep an artificial smile on your face. Do absolutely not engage in any casual conversation with the guests." I offered a sharp nod and quickly took my assigned position. Hundreds of guests began steadily streaming into the room. Elite women draped in stunning designer gowns. Powerful men wearing impeccable, bespoke suits. Massive, flawless diamonds glittering brilliantly under the bright chandelier light. I silently wove my way through the dense, wealthy crowd, politely offering delicate flutes of expensive Veuve Clicquot. I aggressively kept my eyes locked onto the polished floor. A wealthy woman wearing vintage Chanel abruptly stopped me. "Excuse me, dear. Are you officially employed with the hotel staff?" "Yes, ma'am." The automatic lie tumbled effortlessly from my lips. Arthur walked directly past me without offering a single, microscopic glance of recognition. Eleanor paused just long enough to violently whisper in my ear, "Your physical posture is absolutely terrible. Stand up completely straight." Then, Julian abruptly appeared, surrounded by his rowdy groomsmen, loudly laughing and aggressively adjusting his expensive Tom Ford cufflinks. He spotted me and casually waved me over with a flick of his wrist. "Clara, hey. Ensure there is an extra platter of jumbo shrimp delivered to my table. You know exactly how furious Dad gets when he's hungry." "Of course, Julian." He immediately turned his back to me and resumed his conversation. One of his friends, a massive former lacrosse teammate, aggressively squinted at me. "Who exactly is that?" "Oh, just our live-in housekeeper," Julian stated without a second thought. "She has basically worked for our family forever." The horrific, dismissive words violently sliced completely through my soul. Housekeeper. Absolutely not his sister. Absolutely not his family. The housekeeper. Absolutely no one in the group bothered to question the narrative. I seamlessly returned to circulating the massive room, politely offering expensive champagne to elite people who looked entirely through my body exactly as if I were constructed of clear glass. Then I unmistakably felt it. The heavy, intense sensation of someone actively watching me. I slowly turned my head. Entirely across the sprawling ballroom, Richard Whitmore stood completely alone, his expensive champagne resting untouched on a nearby table, his piercing eyes locked fiercely onto my face. He absolutely was not just casually watching me this time. He was intensely, meticulously studying my features. The grand ceremony officially commenced exactly at 4 o'clock. A professional string quartet began playing Pachelbel's canon as Victoria practically floated gracefully down the long aisle in her stunning Vera Wang gown, the massive cathedral train trailing elegantly 15 feet behind her. Julian waited eagerly at the flower-draped altar, beaming with joy, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Arthur and Eleanor sat proudly in the very front row, delicately dabbing their eyes with expensive, monogrammed handkerchiefs. I stood silently at the absolute back of the massive ballroom, my heavy tray gripped in my hand, quietly watching my supposed family from exactly 50 feet away. The hired officiant spoke eloquently about the power of eternal love, deep commitment, and the sacred, unbreakable bond of marriage. Julian's voice audibly cracked with emotion when he recited his vows. Victoria's bright eyes glistened beautifully as she seamlessly slipped the heavy Tiffany platinum band onto his finger. They kissed passionately. The entire room violently erupted into deafening applause, and I simply stood there, completely invisible to the world, holding expensive champagne that I was explicitly forbidden to drink. For one brief, agonizing moment, I permitted myself to desperately imagine an entirely different life. One where I sat proudly in that front row directly beside Eleanor. One where I wore a beautiful lavender bridesmaid dress and happily held a fragrant bouquet of roses. One where Julian proudly introduced me to his stunning new bride as my sister Clara, instead of our housekeeper. But that specific, beautiful life absolutely did not exist in reality. Perhaps it never, ever had. The massive crowd rose to their feet for the joyful recessional. Julian and Victoria swept triumphantly back down the aisle, arm in arm, joyously showered with thousands of delicate rose petals. As they proudly walked past my position, Eleanor unexpectedly caught my eye. Her facial expression was absolutely not warm. It was not maternal or proud. It was a terrifying, freezing warning. Do not ever forget exactly what your place is in this room. I quickly, submissively lowered my gaze to the floor. Somewhere deep in the dense, cheering crowd, I unmistakably felt that intense, watching presence again. Richard Whitmore, standing silently near the back exit, absolutely had not clapped a single time. He had not taken his intense, focused eyes off me for the entire duration of the ceremony. I absolutely did not understand exactly why, but a strange, terrifying feeling rapidly began creeping through my chest. Something massive that I had not allowed myself to feel in over a decade. Profound, terrifying hope. And I honestly possessed absolutely no idea what to do with the emotion. If you have made it this far into the story, I genuinely think you understand exactly why I am sharing this narrative. You might intimately know exactly what it feels like to physically stand inside the walls of your own family home and still be aggressively treated like a complete, disposable outsider. to endlessly serve people who violently refuse to even acknowledge that you exist as a human being. Let me ask you a direct question. Have you ever been forced to silently serve someone who would not even admit you were a part of their family? If you have survived that specific trauma, I desperately want to hear about it. Drop a comment below. Please let me know that I am absolutely not alone in the dark. And if this terrifying story is hitting dangerously close to home for you, please like the video and hit subscribe, because exactly what happened next permanently changed absolutely everything I thought I knew about myself. I will be right back with the conclusion. The lavish reception officially began with an endless array of champagne toasts and a massive 12-piece professional jazz band taking the stage. I exclusively worked the elite Whitmore family table, diligently refilling expensive crystal water glasses and rapidly clearing dirty appetizer plates. Victoria's elegant mother offered me a tight, polite smile as I worked. Her wealthy aunts and uncles casually chatted amongst themselves regarding their sprawling summer estates in the Hamptons. Richard Whitmore sat silently at the absolute head of the table, barely even touching his expensive, gourmet meal. Every single time I cautiously approached the table, I heavily felt his intense gaze tracking my movements. It was not uncomfortable exactly. It was not predatory or freezing cold. It was something entirely different, something I absolutely could not put a name to. When I carefully reached forward to clear his empty salad plate, his hand violently shot out and caught my wrist. It was a gentle, but incredibly firm grip. "I am so profoundly sorry," he stated, his voice incredibly low and tense. "I urgently need to ask you something." "Of course, sir. Your name is Clara?" "Yes." "Clara Vance?" "Yes, sir." He slowly, deliberately released his grip on my wrist. His hand was visibly, noticeably trembling. "Do you genuinely possess any idea exactly who your true, biological mother is?" The exact same, terrifying question from the rehearsal dinner. "I reside with Mr. and Mrs. Vance," I stated incredibly carefully, reciting the only narrative I knew. "They have raised me inside their home since I was a tiny baby." Richard's entire face violently changed. Something fundamental broke deep behind his eyes. Was it profound grief? Or perhaps terrifying recognition? "Excuse me for a moment," he whispered, and abruptly stood up from the formal table. I silently watched him walk rapidly toward the massive terrace doors, violently pulling his cell phone out of his suit pocket. Through the thick glass panes, I could clearly see him frantically pacing back and forth, speaking intensely, almost angrily, to someone on the other end of the line. Victoria finally noticed the commotion. "Is my father physically okay?" I honestly did not know how to formulate an answer. Over at the Vance family table, Eleanor was intently watching the entire bizarre scene unfold. Her crystal champagne glass paused awkwardly halfway to her lips. She aggressively leaned toward Arthur and fiercely whispered something into his ear. He violently turned his head, found me with his eyes across the room, and his facial expression instantly hardened into something I intimately, terrifyingly recognized. Absolute, unadulterated fear. I had absolutely never, ever witnessed Arthur Vance be genuinely afraid of a single thing in my life. Until this exact moment. The hired, professional photographer loudly clapped his hands together and aggressively called for the formal family portraits to begin. "The bride and groom's immediate families, please urgently gather by the grand floral arch." The affluent Whitmores seamlessly assembled first. Richard, his elegant wife, Victoria's older brother, and his stunning wife. A pristine, coordinated cluster of elegant relatives dressed in complementary pastel tones. Then, the Vances were aggressively summoned. Arthur quickly straightened his expensive silk tie. Eleanor flawlessly smoothed the fabric of her Oscar de la Renta gown. Julian happily wrapped a protective arm tightly around Victoria's tiny waist. I intentionally stayed far back in the shadows, my heavy silver tray clutched tightly in my hand. The frustrated photographer aggressively scanned the arranged group, then abruptly pointed a finger directly at me. "What exactly about her? Is she officially considered a part of the family?" Total, suffocating silence gripped the area. Arthur's artificial smile tightened painfully. Eleanor aggressively stared down at the polished floorboards. Julian said absolutely nothing. Then, Richard Whitmore's booming, authoritative voice violently cut through the awkward, heavy pause. Yes, she is absolutely family. Clara, please come over here and stand directly beside me. I completely froze in terror. Sir, are you absolutely certain? I heard the panic in my own voice. His vocal tone was incredibly calm, but unyielding. Come here right now. I slowly, shakily set down my heavy silver tray. My legs literally felt exactly like they belonged to someone else's body as I awkwardly walked toward the elite group. Arthur's face instantly flushed a dangerous, violent shade of red. He absolutely could not publicly object to the demand. Not to Richard Whitmore. Not to the powerful billionaire who was personally writing the checks for this entire $200,000 wedding extravaganza. But I could clearly see his jaw furiously working, the sheer, violent fury barely contained beneath his skin. Richard gently placed his warm hand directly onto my shoulder. His palm felt incredibly warm and incredibly steadying. Stand right here, he stated softly, specifically for my ears only. This is exactly where you belong in the world. The impatient photographer quickly adjusted his heavy camera lens. Is everyone completely ready? Massive, bright smiles. The blinding flash fired rapidly. Richard intentionally kept me standing incredibly close to him as the photographer quickly showed him the digital preview on the camera's glowing screen. I silently watched Richard's face as he aggressively zoomed the image in, specifically focusing on my face. His eyes instantly filled with thick tears. Those exact, specific eyes, he murmured, sounding exactly as if he were talking strictly to himself. That specific chin structure. My God. He frantically pulled out his cell phone again and quickly walked away from the group, rapidly dialing a number. I managed to hear only terrifying, fragmented pieces of the conversation. It is undeniably her. I am absolutely 100% certain. Pull the massive file immediately. The FBI cold case files dating back to 2003 and urgently prepare an expedited DNA kit for tonight. My heart completely, utterly stopped beating. What exact horrific words had he just uttered out loud? The exact moment the photographer finally moved on to capture candid shots, Arthur's heavy, violent hand clamped viciously around my upper arm. We are going outside right now. He aggressively pulled me through a hidden service corridor, marching past the chaotic kitchen and shoving me into a narrow, dark back hallway where massive crates of expensive champagne were stacked haphazardly against the concrete wall. The loud, joyous noise of the wedding reception instantly faded into a distant, muffled hum. What exactly did you just tell him? Arthur's face was mere inches from mine, his hot breath reeking heavily of expensive whiskey. Absolutely nothing. I swear to God I didn't say a single word. Do not you dare attempt to lie to me. His violent grip tightened on my arm until I audibly winced in pain. Why exactly was Whitmore asking highly specific questions regarding your biological mother? I honestly do not know. He simply asked the question, and I explicitly told him that I lived here with you. Arthur forcefully shoved me backward against the concrete wall. The heavy wooden crates violently rattled. Listen to me very, incredibly carefully. His voice dropped to a terrifying, lethal hiss. If you dare to breathe a single syllable, absolutely anything at all, to anyone regarding the internal dynamics of our family, I swear to God I will violently throw you out onto the street tonight. Absolutely zero money. Zero warm clothes. Nothing. You will literally be starving and homeless within a week. Do you explicitly understand my threat? Eleanor abruptly appeared at the very end of the narrow hallway, her expensive high heels clicking ominously against the cold concrete floor. What exactly is happening back here? Whitmore is aggressively asking highly specific questions about her. Arthur jerked his head violently in my direction. Something is going terribly, fundamentally wrong. Eleanor's eyes narrowed into dark, hateful slits. She approached me incredibly slowly, her massive, champagne-colored designer gown swishing loudly against the dirty floor. Clara. Her voice was pure, unadulterated ice. Immediately following the conclusion of the reception, you are mandated to stay behind and clean up the venue. You absolutely do not speak a single word to any of the guests. And whatever bizarre topic Mr. Whitmore desires to discuss with you, you explicitly tell him absolutely nothing. We are your one and only family. We generously saved your life. Without our charity, you would be rotting dead in a gutter somewhere." She smiled, deploying that perfectly practiced, terrifying public smile. "Now, get your pathetic self back to work immediately. And if you embarrass this family again tonight, I promise you, you will violently regret it." They turned and left me standing there, violently shaking, completely alone among the stacked champagne crates. Arthur's terrifying, lifelong threat echoed endlessly in my skull. "Without legal papers, you absolutely do not exist in this world." But Richard Whitmore strongly believed that I did, in fact, exist. He firmly believed I was a specific, important someone. The absolutely terrifying, looming question was, exactly who was I? I numbly returned to the chaotic reception floor, existing entirely in a daze. The live jazz band had started playing upbeat music, and affluent couples were gracefully swaying on the polished dance floor. Julian and Victoria were situated in the absolute center, their foreheads touching intimately, perfectly projecting the absolute picture of newlywed bliss. Arthur and Eleanor sat comfortably at the primary family table, loudly laughing with elite guests, flawlessly performing their assigned roles as deeply devoted, loving parents. I slowly picked up my heavy silver tray and seamlessly resumed circulating the room, but my hands absolutely would not stop violently trembling. Arthur was entirely right. Without proper documentation, without undeniable proof of my identity, I was legally a ghost. If I foolishly attempted to flee the venue tonight, I would be aggressively picked up by local police within days. A pathetic vagrant possessing zero name, zero verifiable history, and absolutely no one on earth to claim her. This horrific reality was my life. It inherently always had been. It inevitably always would be. I slowly drifted toward the extreme edge of the massive ballroom, inching closer toward the emergency exit doors. Perhaps I could just silently slip away into the shadows, disappear entirely into the freezing night, walk until my legs physically gave out, and simply let whatever tragic fate happened next finally happen. What actual difference did it make in the universe? Absolutely no one in this room would miss me. Absolutely no one would even notice my absence. Clara. I slowly turned around. Richard Whitmore stood quietly behind me, his handsome face deeply etched with a profound, complex emotion I entirely failed to recognize. Was it intense concern? Profound grief? "May I please speak with you entirely privately, just for a brief moment?" I nervously glanced back toward the main family table. Eleanor was intensely watching our interaction, her fake smile permanently frozen on her face. "I honestly do not think I should," I whispered. "Please." His deep voice violently cracked with emotion. "It is incredibly, vitally important. I have been desperately looking for someone. I have been looking for them for a very, very long time." He slowly reached deep into his tailored suit jacket pocket and gently pulled out a small, physical photograph. It was incredibly old, noticeably faded, and soft at the edges, exactly as if it had been obsessively handled countless times over many decades. It was an image of a stunning young woman tenderly holding a tiny infant. The woman possessed dark chestnut hair and piercing green eyes. Eyes that looked exactly, terrifyingly like mine. "Do you happen to recognize absolutely anyone in this specific picture?" Richard asked incredibly quietly. My throat completely, utterly closed up. I honestly do not know who that woman is. But something profound, something ancient and deeply buried inside my soul violently stirred. Something that felt terrifyingly exactly like a forgotten memory trying to surface. Richard gently guided me out onto the sprawling, stone terrace perfectly overlooking the hotel's immaculate gardens. The night air was incredibly cool and refreshing. Inside the ballroom, the lavish reception joyously continued. Clinking champagne glasses, loud bursts of laughter, the jazz band seamlessly launching into a classic Sinatra standard. Out here in the darkness, there was absolutely nothing but the distant, muffled hum of highway traffic and the deafening, violent hammering of my own panicked heart. Richard slowly held the faded photograph out toward me again. In the soft, ambient light spilling from the ballroom windows, I could finally see the image significantly more clearly. The woman was undeniably young, perhaps in her mid-20s, sporting an incredibly tired but radiantly beautiful smile. The tiny baby nestled safely in her arms was tightly wrapped in a pale pink hospital blanket, eyes peacefully closed, appearing impossibly small and fragile. "This woman is my biological sister, Margaret," Richard stated, his voice trembling heavily. "And the tiny baby is her biological daughter, Clara Ashford Whitmore." I stared at him in absolute, unadulterated shock. "I honestly do not understand what you are telling me." Exactly 23 years ago, Margaret's newborn baby was violently abducted from the Stanford Hospital maternity ward, maliciously kidnapped directly from the nursery in the dead of night. His strong voice violently wavered, fighting back tears. "My sister obsessively spent 5 agonizing years desperately searching the country for her. She aggressively hired elite private investigators. She worked tirelessly alongside the FBI. She absolutely never, ever stopped believing her precious daughter was still alive out there." He swallowed hard, visibly fighting the emotion. "She tragically passed away when the baby would have been exactly 5 years old. Massive heart failure. But the attending doctors explicitly stated it was profound, insurmountable grief. She simply, utterly gave up the will to live." "I am so incredibly, profoundly sorry," my voice emerged as a fragile, broken whisper. "But I honestly still do not see exactly what this tragic story has to do with my life." Richard slowly turned his body to face me completely. "Clara." The abducted baby's legal name was Clara. She possessed striking green eyes. That is a highly rare genetic trait in our family bloodline, but Margaret possessed them too. He gently gestured toward my face with a trembling hand. "That exact nose structure, that specific chin, the exact shape of your mouth. It is absolutely, biologically identical." I violently took a large step backward in terror. "Mr. Whitmore, I strongly believe you are deeply, tragically confused right now. I have been desperately searching the country for 23 entire years." Heavy tears finally streamed freely down his cheeks. "And the exact moment I laid eyes on your face at the rehearsal dinner, I instantly knew. I felt it in my soul. I knew." He slowly reached into his other jacket pocket and carefully withdrew a small, sealed plastic medical container. "Please, I am begging you. Just allow me to secure a rapid DNA swab sample tonight. If the results prove that I am entirely wrong, I swear to God I will never, ever bother you again. But if I am actually right," he took a deep breath, visibly steadying his shaking frame. "If I am right, then the toxic people sitting inside that ballroom are absolutely not your biological family. They are the specific monsters who maliciously stole you." The heavy words hung suspended in the cool night air exactly like thick, toxic smoke. "Stole you." For 23 entire years, I had been aggressively, relentlessly told that I was utterly worthless. That I was biologically born exclusively to serve them. That I should be endlessly, pathetically grateful merely to have a freezing roof over my head. And now this prominent man, this complete, wealthy stranger, was emphatically telling me that I might have actually been stolen. That the specific people who brutally raised me might actually be federal criminals. That I might actually possess a true biological family who desperately, fiercely wanted me. It was entirely too massive, too impossibly huge for my traumatized brain to process. "I absolutely cannot do this," I panicked, aggressively backing further away toward the door. "I cannot handle this right now. Clara, please." Richard's voice was incredibly gentle, yet filled with intense, desperate urgency. "I currently have an elite, private medical laboratory on absolute standby tonight. They are fully ABB certified. It is the absolute gold standard for legal DNA testing. They guarantee conclusive results in exactly 72 hours. Even if the test positively matches, if it matches, you are undeniably Margaret's child. You are my biological niece." He swallowed audibly. "And you are the sole, legal heir to the massive trust fund she established right before she passed away." I abruptly stopped moving. "What trust fund?" Margaret absolutely never gave up the hope that her beautiful daughter would eventually be recovered. She aggressively established a massive, secure trust fund entirely in your name. In Clara Ashford Whitmore's legal name. It was explicitly designed to be immediately released if you were ever successfully recovered. The capital has been aggressively growing with compound interest for 23 years. Exactly how much money? I asked, my voice barely audible. Richard locked eyes with me. Exactly $12 million. The entire stone terrace violently tilted beneath my feet. But this situation is absolutely not about the money, he stated quickly, sensing my overwhelming shock. It is entirely about uncovering the truth. It is about securing ultimate justice. And it is about finally granting my deceased sister peace. Finally knowing exactly what happened to her missing child. Inside the ballroom, the live jazz band seamlessly shifted to playing a slow, romantic ballad. Through the massive glass doors, I could clearly see Eleanor anxiously scanning the crowded room, aggressively searching for me, aggressively searching for her property. I thought deeply about the freezing concrete basement, the draconian family rules, the wrought tin cane hidden maliciously in the pantry. 23 agonizing years of being repeatedly told I was absolutely nothing. And then I thought about Margaret Whitmore, tragically dying of a broken heart, absolutely never knowing what happened to her beautiful baby girl. I met Richard's desperate eyes. Exactly what do I need to do? He quickly opened the sterile DNA kit. Simply open your mouth for the swab. The subsequent 72 hours were undeniably the absolute longest, most agonizing hours of my entire existence. I numbly went back to my grueling daily routine, waking up at exactly 5 o'clock in the morning, scrubbing floors, cooking elaborate meals, cleaning the estate. But absolutely everything felt fundamentally, radically different now. Every single time Arthur arrogantly barked a harsh order at me, I intensely looked at his face and silently wondered, did you literally purchase me? Every single time Eleanor cruelly criticized my work, I clearly heard Richard's voice echoing in my skull, the monsters who stole you. They absolutely noticed the subtle, psychological change in my demeanor. What exactly is wrong with your attitude today? Eleanor demanded sharply on the second excruciating morning. I had accidentally allowed the dark roast coffee to sit for 3 minutes too long, and it had turned slightly bitter. Absolutely nothing is wrong, Mrs. Sterling. I am simply feeling a bit exhausted today. You are literally always exhausted, she scoffed, aggressively pouring the entire, full pot of expensive coffee directly down the stainless steel sink drain. Immediately brew another fresh pot, and this time, try to actually pay attention to your job. I silently brewed another pot. I meticulously washed the dirty dishes. I flawlessly folded the massive piles of laundry. But hidden deep inside my apron pocket, I safely carried the small, torn slip of paper Richard had discreetly given me. His private, direct cell phone number, written in blue ink. Julian and Victoria had officially departed for their lavish, 3-week honeymoon in Bali. The massive house felt significantly quieter without his loud presence, but absolutely no less oppressive and toxic. On the agonizing third night, I lay wide awake on my thin mattress in the pitch-black basement, blankly staring up at the cracked concrete ceiling, obsessively counting the passing hours. Then, my cheap cell phone violently buzzed against the concrete floor. The ancient, battered Nokia device, the absolute only piece of technology one privately owned, secretly purchased years ago with aggressively saved grocery change, glowed brightly in the dark. It was a new text message originating from an unknown number. The official laboratory results are in. Can we urgently meet tomorrow morning? 10 o'clock sharp. The small cafe located on Main Street. RW. My heart completely stopped beating in my chest. Then it violently restarted, racing at a terrifying speed. I rapidly typed back my response. I will absolutely be there. The next morning, I calmly informed Eleanor that I desperately needed to walk to the store to purchase specific cleaning supplies that we had run out of. She barely bothered to look up from reading her glossy magazine. Ensure you are back here by exactly noon. I am hosting several elite guests for an important luncheon today. Yes, Mrs. Sterling. I confidently walked out the heavy front door, and I purposefully kept walking directly toward the truth. I kept walking toward the explosive answer to absolutely every single question I had ever been entirely too terrified to ask. The small, independent cafe was a cozy, unassuming establishment located on Main Street. Exposed, rustic brick walls, mismatched, eclectic furniture, and the strong, comforting scent of fresh, roasting espresso beans. Richard was already seated there when I arrived, occupying a quiet, secluded corner booth with a thick manila envelope resting squarely in front of him. His eyes were incredibly red and swollen, exactly as if he absolutely had not slept in days. "Clara." He immediately stood up as I cautiously approached the table. "Thank you so incredibly much for coming today. What exactly do the laboratory results say?" I demanded, entirely skipping any polite greetings. He did not provide an answer immediately. Instead, he slowly, deliberately slid the heavy envelope across the wooden table toward me. I opened the flap with violently trembling fingers. The dense, multi-page document inside was completely covered in complex, technical medical language and complex probability calculations. But one highly specific, summarized section near the bottom was aggressively highlighted in bright yellow ink. Combined Paternity Index, 99.97%. Final conclusion. The tested individual, Clara Sterling, is undeniably the biological daughter of Margaret Eleanor Whitmore, deceased. I read the highlighted paragraph 3 consecutive times. For times. The explosive words absolutely did not change. "You are officially my biological niece," Richard stated incredibly softly, tears welling in his eyes. "You are undeniably Margaret's daughter. You are Clara Ashford Whitmore." The entire room violently tilted on its axis. I desperately gripped the rough edge of the wooden table to ground myself. This is actually real. It is entirely real. I have already proactively contacted my high-level contacts within the FBI. The cold case file originating from 2003 is currently being aggressively reopened as we speak. He reached entirely across the small table and gently, protectively placed his large hand firmly over mine. "Arthur and Eleanor Sterling will be the subjects of a massive, immediate federal investigation. If they illegally acquired you through the black market, if they literally purchased you from child traffickers, they will be aggressively, mercilessly prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law." Prosecuted? The legal word tasted entirely foreign and strange on my tongue. Massive federal charges. Severe human trafficking. Egregious document fraud. Severe child endangerment. Richard's voice hardened into absolute, unyielding steel. They could realistically face 15 to 20 years inside a federal penitentiary. I sat back heavily in my wooden chair, the explosive DNA report clutched desperately against my chest. 23 entire years. 23 years of freezing basements, brutal physical beatings, and being endlessly, aggressively told I was born exclusively to be a servant. And absolutely none of it was ever true. I was absolutely not worthless. I was not an unwanted burden. I possessed an actual family. A real, biological family. A loving mother who had wanted me so fiercely that she literally died of a broken heart when she tragically lost me. And now, finally, the explosive truth was aggressively coming to the surface. I desperately need to pause the narrative right here for a moment, because this is the exact, explosive juncture where absolutely everything fundamentally changed. For 23 long years, I genuinely believed I was absolute nothingness. I believed I inherently deserved absolutely nothing but scraps. And in a mere 72 hours, a single piece of scientific paper completely, violently destroyed that toxic lie. But now I was faced with a massive, terrifying choice to make. I could easily, quietly walk away right now. I could take my newly discovered identity, start entirely over somewhere new, and absolutely never look backward. Or I could choose to let the devastating truth explode publicly. I could force Arthur and Eleanor to brutally face exactly what they had done. What exactly would you do in my position? Please tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what you would choose. And if you are still riding alongside me in this story, please hit the subscribe button right now. The final, explosive confrontation is rapidly approaching, and it is going to completely shatter absolutely everything. Exactly 1 week later, the ultimate trap was flawlessly set into motion. Richard had officially, generously invited the entire Sterling family to a sprawling, magnificent estate in Greenwich. It was a breathtaking, 12-bedroom historic mansion situated on 5 pristine acres, featuring massive wrought iron security gates and a sprawling circular driveway lined with perfectly manicured topiaries. The fabricated, official reason for the invitation was to seriously discuss massive, lucrative business opportunities for Julian's future career. Arthur had been utterly, visibly ecstatic when the heavy, embossed invitation arrived in the mail. "This is absolutely it," he had arrogantly crowed during dinner. "Richard Whitmore actively wants to bring me into his highly exclusive, billionaire inner circle. I absolutely knew this strategic marriage would pay massive dividends for us." Eleanor had aggressively spent 3 entire days meticulously selecting the perfect, elite outfit for the occasion. A pale blue, tailored Armani pantsuit, authentic pearl earrings, her blonde hair freshly, expensively highlighted at the salon. Julian and Victoria were actually flying back early from their honeymoon in Bali specifically to attend the highly important meeting. Absolutely no one in the family suspected a single thing was amiss. I was explicitly instructed to accompany them, of course. To seamlessly assist the hired staff with serving the refreshments, Eleanor had stated exactly as though it were the most obvious, natural thing in the world. I absolutely did not offer a single word of argument. When our vehicle finally pulled up to the massive Whitmore estate, Arthur let out a low, impressed whistle. "This massive property must be worth $30 million easily." "Significantly more," Eleanor murmured, her eyes gleaming with raw, unadulterated greed. We were formally ushered into the sprawling main sitting room. It was a cavernous, opulent space boasting 20-foot ceilings, massive, original oil paintings displayed in gilded frames, and antique furniture that genuinely looked exactly like it belonged behind velvet ropes in a national museum. Richard greeted our group incredibly warmly. He firmly shook Arthur's hand and politely kissed Eleanor's cheek. "Please, make yourselves entirely comfortable. Julian and Victoria should be arriving from the airport any moment now." I intentionally hung far back near the massive double doorway, silently watching the scene unfold. Arthur was far too consumed by his own arrogance and the opulent surroundings to notice the other individuals present in the house. He absolutely did not notice the stern man wearing a sharp gray suit patiently waiting in the adjacent, dark room. He completely failed to notice the severe-looking woman with a thick manila folder resting ominously on her lap. But I undeniably did. Richard briefly caught my eye and offered an almost imperceptible, confirming nod. The federal FBI agents were securely in position. The explosive evidence was fully prepared. And Arthur and Eleanor Sterling had just arrogantly, blindly walked straight into the absolute reckoning they had spent 23 years desperately avoiding. A uniformed housekeeper quietly rolled in a massive, gleaming silver tea service. The bone china cups were undoubtedly worth significantly more than the entire Sterling family vehicle. Eleanor accepted her delicate teacup with highly exaggerated, performative graciousness, elegantly crossing her legs at the ankle exactly like an aristocrat she had seen in vintage films. "This is an absolutely beautiful, stunning home you have, Richard," she stated smoothly. "Just truly breathtaking. Thank you for hosting us." Richard comfortably settled into his massive leather armchair, his facial expression entirely pleasant but utterly unreadable. "I actually wanted to deeply discuss a highly specific matter with you both before Julian arrives." "Something regarding Clara?" Arthur's delicate teacup loudly rattled against its matching saucer. "Clara?" "Yes." Richard casually gestured toward the far corner where I stood silently near the doorway. "She has been a fixture in your family for quite a considerable amount of time, hasn't she?" "Since she was a tiny infant," Eleanor stated incredibly quickly, almost too quickly. "We graciously adopted her when she was just a few fragile months old. We generously provided her with absolutely everything. A beautiful home, premium food, a world-class education. We have been incredibly, exceptionally good to her." "Adopted?" Richard slowly nodded his head, his tone dripping with lethal curiosity. "That is highly interesting. Because I specifically had my corporate attorneys execute a comprehensive check of the municipal county records this past week. There is absolutely zero adoption paperwork on file for anyone legally named Clara Sterling anywhere in the state. Absolute, Suffocating silence instantly descended upon the massive room. Arthur slowly, deliberately set down his teacup on the table. The municipal records must simply be incomplete or misfiled. You intimately know exactly how incompetent those government administrative agencies can be. Critical documents get lost all the time. I also instructed them to comprehensively check with the Vital Statistics Office for the state of Connecticut, Richard continued, his voice remaining terrifyingly calm. Absolutely no birth certificate exists. Zero social security number was ever issued at birth. There are absolutely zero hospital birth records located anywhere in the entire tri-state area. Eleanor's heavily practiced, plastic smile was visibly beginning to aggressively crack at the edges. What exactly are you maliciously implying here, Richard? I am aggressively implying that Clara possesses absolutely zero legal identity. Zero documentation whatsoever. He leaned intensely forward in his chair, which instantly raises a highly fascinating, disturbing question. Exactly where on earth did she come from? Arthur abruptly stood up from the sofa. I honestly do not know what kind of sick, twisted game you are attempting to play here today, Whitmore, but I absolutely do not appreciate the baseless accusations. Richard absolutely did not flinch. It is absolutely not a baseless accusation, Arthur. Not yet, anyway. He slowly unzipped the heavy leather portfolio resting on the table beside him. But I strongly believe you both urgently need to see exactly what is contained inside this folder. Richard carefully removed two highly official documents from the portfolio and laid them flat on the glass coffee table. The very first document was the explosive DNA report, the exact same report I had already witnessed, featuring its bright yellow highlighted conclusion and its staggering 99.97% scientific certainty. The secondary document appeared significantly older. It was a heavily photocopied FBI field report, displaying a prominent case number at the absolute top, and the word confidential aggressively stamped across it in bold red ink. This specific document, Richard stated firmly, pointing directly to the DNA report, scientifically confirms that Clara is a 99.97% exact genetic match to my deceased sister, Margaret Whitmore. Clara is undeniably her biological daughter. Arthur's face violently drained from aggressive crimson red to a sickly, stark white. And this specific document, Richard aggressively tapped the aged FBI file, is the official cold case file dating back to March of 2003. My infant niece, Clara Ashford Whitmore, was violently abducted directly from Stanford Hospital when she was a mere 6 months old. She was absolutely never recovered by law enforcement. He slowly looked up, his eyes locking onto Arthur's terrified face. Until exactly today. Eleanor's delicate teacup completely slipped from her trembling fingers and violently shattered into a dozen pieces against the expensive Persian rug. This is absolute, total insanity, Arthur violently sputtered, spittle flying from his lips. We absolutely didn't. We would absolutely never do something like that. Then please, logically explain the complete absence of documentation. Richard's voice hardened into impenetrable steel. Explain exactly why she possesses zero birth certificate, zero adoption files, zero legal proof that she was ever legally considered your child. There was a massive house fire. Eleanor's voice pitched high and hysterical with raw panic. The critical records were tragically lost in the blaze. There was absolutely no fire. Richard violently cut her off. I aggressively checked the records. I checked every single hospital log in a 300-mile radius. There was absolutely no house fire. There were no lost records. And there was absolutely no child named Clara ever born to any family possessing the surname Sterling. The heavy wooden door to the adjacent room violently swung open. The stern man wearing the gray suit stepped purposefully through the doorway, closely followed by the severe-looking woman, who was now holding up a gleaming federal badge. Arthur Sterling. Eleanor Sterling. The man's voice was incredibly flat, cold, and entirely official. I am Special Agent Thorne with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have several highly serious questions regarding the exact method of acquisition of your supposed daughter. Arthur violently stumbled backward, his face looking exactly like wet ash. Eleanor immediately began to hysterically, loudly cry. And I simply stood perfectly still in the corner, quietly watching the towering, impenetrable walls finally close in on the absolute monsters who had arrogantly called themselves my parents for 2 decades. Exactly what transpired next occurred with terrifying, blinding speed. Special Agent Thorne officially produced a federal arrest warrant. His partner, Agent Chin, immediately began loudly, clinically reading the Miranda rights. Arthur Sterling, Eleanor Sterling. You are officially under arrest by the federal government for severe suspicion of human trafficking, aggravated document fraud, and felony child endangerment. You possess the absolute right to remain silent. Absolutely anything you say can and aggressively will be used against you in a federal court of law. Arthur panicked and desperately attempted to flee the room. He managed to take exactly 3 frantic steps toward the hallway before Agent Thorne violently grabbed his arm, aggressively spun him around, and forcefully pinned him face-first against the expensive wallpaper. The arrogant, untouchable man who had aggressively terrorized me for 23 entire years, who had violently starved me in a freezing basement, who had repeatedly beaten me, who had relentlessly told me I was absolute nothingness. He pathetically whimpered and cried exactly like a terrified child as the heavy steel handcuffs violently clicked shut around his wrists. Eleanor dramatically collapsed onto the plush sofa, thick black mascara rapidly streaming down her panicked cheeks. "Clara," she wailed hysterically, reaching her hands out toward me. "Clara, please. Please tell these officers this is a massive mistake. We are your loving family. We generously raised you." I slowly walked out of the shadows and looked directly at her. I looked at the exact woman who had violently slapped my face for daring to ask questions, who had maliciously locked me in a dark basement, who had explicitly told me I was born exclusively to serve her needs. "You absolutely did not raise me as a family member. You aggressively raised me as an indentured servant," I stated. My voice was incredibly calm, terrifyingly steady. "You absolutely never, not for a single second, treated me like I was family. We generously gave you absolutely everything we had. You aggressively gave me a stained mattress resting on a freezing concrete floor. I took a deliberate, slow step closer to her crumpled form. You maliciously took away my true identity. You violently took away my childhood. And you stole my biological mother away from me." Eleanor's face completely crumpled in absolute agony. "We genuinely didn't know the truth. We honestly thought you understood the arrangement." Arthur's voice violently cut through the room from where he was pinned against the wall. He sounded suddenly vicious, even while restrained in handcuffs. "You explicitly knew exactly what we were executing, Eleanor. Do not you dare attempt to pretend otherwise to save yourself." At that exact, explosive moment, the massive front doors of the estate swung wide open. Julian and Victoria confidently walked into the foyer, looking deeply tanned, incredibly refreshed, and beaming happily from their luxurious Bali honeymoon. Their joyous smiles completely vanished the absolute second they saw the armed FBI agents and their parents struggling in federal handcuffs. Victoria's face went entirely slack with shock. What the absolute hell is going on in here? The severe federal charges officially came down within a single month. Arthur and Eleanor Sterling were formally, publicly indicted on 3 massive felony counts each: severe human trafficking under federal statutes, aggravated document fraud, and felony child endangerment. The exhaustive, subsequent federal investigation explicitly revealed that they had aggressively purchased me from a highly sophisticated, underground black market adoption network back in 2003. They had paid exactly $15,000 in untraceable, raw cash for my life. The sinister trafficking network had actually been dismantled and shut down by the authorities years ago, but the FBI had meticulously preserved the encrypted ledgers. My true name was explicitly located on a dusty ledger page, callously listed right between an exorbitant purchase price and a scheduled delivery date, exactly as if I were a piece of imported inventory. The highly publicized trial dragged on for 4 agonizing months. I bravely took the witness stand and testified against them twice. Arthur aggressively maintained his absolute innocence until the very bitter end of the trial. He desperately claimed to the jury that he had been falsely told I was a tragic, abandoned orphan, and that he had simply, generously attempted to provide me with a significantly better life. The jury absolutely did not believe a single word of his fabricated narrative. Eleanor violently turned on him during her own tearful testimony. She aggressively claimed she had been heavily coerced into the arrangement, that Arthur had violently threatened her life, and that she had always secretly desired to treat me significantly better, but simply couldn't because of his tyranny. The jury absolutely did not believe a single word of her lies, either. The final, devastating sentencing hearing arrived. Arthur was aggressively sentenced to serve exactly 18 years inside a maximum security federal penitentiary. Eleanor was sentenced to serve exactly 12 years. Absolutely all of their massive, ill-gotten financial assets were completely frozen by the government pending massive civil proceedings. The sprawling, opulent house in Fairfield County, the exact same house boasting the massive Sub-Zero refrigerator and the luxury Calcutta Marble Island, featuring the freezing, concrete basement where I had miserably slept for 23 years, was aggressively seized by the state to completely cover their exorbitant legal fees and my impending, massive financial restitution. Julian's entire, arrogant world violently collapsed as well. Richard Whitmore aggressively, completely withdrew all forms of financial and professional support the exact day of the FBI arrests. The massive, $200,000 bill accrued for the extravagant wedding was suddenly completely transferred to Julian as massive, crushing personal debt. His highly lucrative, elite job at Whitmore Properties was brutally terminated immediately. Victoria formally filed for a rapid, contested divorce exactly 3 weeks later. I absolutely cannot be legally tied to this scandal. I quietly overheard her furiously screaming at Julian over the phone one afternoon. Your horrific parents literally purchased a human being on the black market. They trafficked an innocent child. I absolutely cannot have my reputation associated with that level of evil. The arrogant man who had aggressively grown up believing he was an untouchable, golden prince was suddenly left completely alone, totally unemployed, and actively drowning in a mountain of insurmountable debt. And me? For the absolute first time in my entire existence, I was completely, undeniably free. Julian unexpectedly called my cell phone exactly 6 months following the conclusion of the sentencing. I almost aggressively ignored the call. Seeing the name Julian Sterling flashing on my screen still managed to trigger a freezing, terrified reaction deep inside my chest, even now. But sheer, morbid curiosity ultimately won the battle. Hello, Julian. His voice sounded incredibly thin, raspy, and entirely unfamiliar. It was absolutely not the booming, arrogant golden boy I had spent my life silently serving. It sounded like someone who had been violently hollowed out. I urgently need to speak with you regarding. About what, exactly? I am in massive, terrifying trouble. He let out a dark, bitter laugh. Actually, that is the understatement of the century. My luxury apartment is completely gone. My sports car was repossessed. Victoria's aggressive divorce lawyers are actively suing me for severe emotional damages simply for being legally associated with our family's horrific crimes. I literally cannot secure employment anywhere in the state. Absolutely everyone has seen the explosive news coverage. I remained perfectly silent and waited for the inevitable ask. I was desperately wondering if maybe you could generously help me out. Just a personal loan. Just until I managed to get entirely back on my feet. And there it finally was. After 23 entire years of aggressively treating me exactly like disposable, invisible furniture, he now desperately required something vital from me. Julian, I stated incredibly slowly, emphasizing every syllable. In absolutely all the agonizing years we resided together inside that massive house, did you ever, for a single second, offer to help me? Silence echoed heavily on the line. Did you ever once bravely stand up and defend me when Arthur was violently beating me? Did you ever once bother to ask why I was forced to sleep in a freezing basement? Did you ever, for a single day, treat me exactly like a human sister? I honestly didn't know the extent of the abuse. You absolutely knew, Julian. My voice remained terrifyingly level. You simply, callously did not care. My existence was highly convenient for you. I aggressively made your life significantly easier. And now that I am no longer trapped there to silently serve your needs, You possess absolutely no idea how to actually survive in the real world. Clara, please, I am begging you. I am absolutely not going to offer you a single dime, Julian. Not because I harbor a dark, vindictive hatred for you, but simply because you desperately need to learn a brutal lesson you absolutely never learned while growing up. I paused, letting the reality sink in. Actions possess severe consequences, and so does absolute silence. I aggressively ended the call. My hand was visibly shaking, but my heart felt incredibly, unshakably steady. For the absolute first time in my life, I had successfully established a terrifying boundary, and I fully intended to aggressively maintain it. My massive, rightful inheritance officially cleared exactly 3 months after the explosive trial concluded. Richard's elite team of corporate lawyers had worked aggressively and tirelessly to definitively verify my true legal identity and officially activate the massive trust fund Margaret had originally established back in 2003. The exhaustive legal process required mountains of court orders, official FBI confirmation documents, and endless stacks of bureaucratic paperwork. But eventually, the final, certified document arrived in the mail. Beneficiary: Clara Ashford Whitmore Trust. Total liquid value: $12,847,329.16. Current status: active. I sat and read that staggering, impossible number 7 consecutive times before it genuinely felt real. Richard personally drove me to the massive financial institution on the exact day the funds were officially released into my control. We sat together inside a sprawling, private executive office located on the absolute top floor of the building, completely surrounded by rich mahogany furniture and expensive oil paintings, while a senior banker meticulously explained complex investment options and long-term tax implications. $12 million. It was infinitely more money than the Sterling family would ever see in 10 consecutive lifetimes. But it was absolutely not the staggering amount of money that fundamentally changed my soul. It was the name printed on the accounts. Clara Ashford Whitmore. My actual, true, original name. The beautiful name my biological mother had lovingly given me before I was violently stolen from her arms. Richard enthusiastically helped me move my belongings into a massive, luxurious guest suite located inside his sprawling Greenwich estate. I finally possessed my very own, massive bedroom featuring towering windows that perfectly overlooked a sprawling, blooming rose garden. I possessed a massive king-size bed adorned with ultra-luxurious, Egyptian cotton sheets. I had a private, en-suite bathroom that was significantly larger than my entire, old concrete basement. The very first night I stayed there, I absolutely could not manage to sleep a single wink. I simply spent hours aimlessly walking around the suite, gently touching the painted walls, running my fingertips across the expensive silk curtains, desperately reminding my traumatized brain that this beautiful reality was actually real. Richard immediately enrolled me in a highly intensive, elite college preparation program. My complete, tragic lack of formal childhood education absolutely did not matter to him. He provided endless resources, brilliant private tutors, dedicated psychological counselors, and specialists who explicitly focused on helping severe survivors of human trafficking completely rebuild their shattered lives. Exactly 1 year later, I proudly received my official acceptance letter in the mail. Yale University. I had secured a comprehensive, full-ride academic scholarship explicitly designed through a foundation for severe human trafficking survivors. I held that heavy, embossed letter in my trembling hands and violently cried for over an hour. Then I dug through the massive archives of the Whitmore estate and uncovered something incredibly precious. A handwritten, faded note originally penned by my mother, Margaret, dated exactly 2003, the very year I was violently taken from her. I made the difficult decision to visit Arthur and Eleanor exactly once in prison. It was approximately 8 months following their brutal sentencing. I absolutely did not owe them a single thing. Richard and my dedicated trauma therapist both strongly advised against the visit, but I aggressively needed ultimate closure. I desperately needed to look them directly in the eye as a powerful, free woman and finally say the words I had been suffocatingly carrying inside my chest for 23 years. The massive federal correctional facility was located deep in northern Pennsylvania. It was a terrifying, depressing labyrinth of gray concrete blocks, razor wire fences, and buzzing fluorescent lights that made absolutely everyone look sickly and pale. Arthur was heavily escorted into the visitation room first. He was wearing an ill-fitting, bright orange prison jumpsuit that hung awkwardly loose on his shrinking frame. He had lost a significant amount of weight. His expensive, heavy Rolex was permanently gone. His wrists were completely bare. Eleanor was escorted in next. Absolutely no more designer Oscar de la Renta gowns. Absolutely no more expensive pearl necklaces. Just drab, prison-issue clothing and a heavily lined face that looked exactly as if it had violently aged a full decade in a mere 8 months. They awkwardly sat down directly across the metal table from me. "You actually came to see us," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. Her eyes immediately welled up with tears. "I prayed to God every single night that you would come. I am absolutely not here for a tearful reconciliation," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the sterile room. "I am exclusively here because I possess exactly one thing I need to say to you both." Arthur violently glared at me. Even now, entirely broken and federally imprisoned, that highly familiar, toxic contempt briefly flickered deep inside his eyes. "Then just say it and get it over with." I directly met his furious gaze, completely unflinching. "For 23 entire years, you aggressively, maliciously brainwashed me into believing I was utterly worthless. You explicitly told me I was biologically born to serve you. You demanded I be endlessly grateful for your pathetic scraps of food. I intentionally kept my vocal tone terrifyingly steady. But you were completely, catastrophically wrong. I was absolutely not born to be your servant. I was violently stolen from a loving mother, and you explicitly knew it the entire time." Eleanor began to sob hysterically. "We genuinely thought we were saving you from a terrible life. You genuinely thought you were securing a lifetime of free slave labor." I violently cut her off. "I am absolutely not here to listen to your pathetic, fabricated excuses. I am exclusively here to explicitly tell you that I am completely, permanently done. I am absolutely no longer carrying your toxic shame. I am absolutely no longer carrying the burden of your horrific cruelty." I slowly stood up from the metal table. "I will absolutely never, ever forget exactly what horrific things you did to me. But I will also absolutely never allow those actions to permanently define who I become." I confidently turned around and walked out of the visitation room. I absolutely did not look back a single time. And I absolutely never laid eyes on them again. I am currently writing this final narrative from my cozy dorm room at Yale University. It is incredibly small. It is significantly smaller than the sprawling luxury suite at Richard's massive estate. But it is undeniably entirely mine. My true, legal name is proudly displayed on the heavy wooden door. My thick, heavy textbooks are meticulously arranged on the shelves. My official university acceptance letter is proudly framed and mounted directly above my desk. Some mornings, my traumatized brain still instinctively jolts me awake at exactly 5 o'clock out of pure, terrifying habit. But now, instead of rushing to aggressively scrub filthy floors, I peacefully brew a cup of premium coffee and quietly read my advanced psychology textbooks. I am aggressively studying to become a licensed clinical therapist. Specifically, I intend to exclusively work with severe survivors of human trafficking and extreme family abuse. I desperately want to utilize my pain to help individuals exactly like me finally find their way completely out of the suffocating darkness. On my small nightstand, resting directly next to my alarm clock, I securely keep exactly 2 highly precious items. The very first item is my brand new, certified legal birth certificate. Clara Ashford Whitmore. Officially born on March 3, 2003, at Stanford Hospital, California. Biological mother, Margaret Eleanor Whitmore. The secondary item is the fragile, handwritten letter Richard miraculously uncovered hidden deep inside Margaret's archives. The exact letter she lovingly wrote to me during the very first week I was violently taken from her, long before she even realized I had been permanently stolen. My darling, beautiful Clara. If you are ever reading these words someday in the future, I desperately want you to know with absolute certainty that you are the absolute greatest, most profound gift I ever received in my life. From the exact moment you were brought into this world, I intrinsically knew you were destined for truly extraordinary things. Absolutely no matter what horrific things happen in life, absolutely no matter where this chaotic universe takes you, please always remember this truth. You are so deeply, unconditionally loved. You are so fiercely, desperately wanted. You are absolutely, inherently enough. I read that fragile letter every single morning without fail. For 23 entire years, I was violently brainwashed to believe I was absolute nothingness. I was brutally taught that I was biologically born to serve others, and that I fundamentally did not deserve a basic seat at the human table. Now, I explicitly know the absolute truth. I was inherently born to be deeply loved. And I am dedicating the absolute rest of my entire existence to ensuring that other broken survivors explicitly know that they are too. Thank you so incredibly much for staying alongside Clara until the absolute bitter end of this journey. I must clarify that many of the specific details in Clara's narrative have been carefully dramatized to deliver a highly impactful, meaningful message regarding survival and life lessons. However, the dark reality is that life is frequently full of highly unexpected, terrifying twists, and horrifying situations exactly like this one occur significantly more often than society would ever like to admit. Every single year, thousands upon thousands of missing children cases tragically remain permanently unsolved. Every single day, an innocent person out there is actively being treated exactly like they are less than human by the specific individuals who should biologically love them the most. If this incredibly dark, powerful story touched your soul in any capacity, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. And if you personally know someone who desperately needs to hear the message that they inherently deserve significantly better treatment in life, please share this video with them today. More incredible stories regarding unshakable strength, uncovering the absolute truth, and aggressively reclaiming your inherent self-worth are currently waiting for you in the description box below. Thank you so incredibly much for watching.